Welcome, everyone. I'm Michael David Fox. I'm the director of the Center for Eurasian Russian East European Studies here at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. And I'm very pleased to introduce our host for Russia and its neighbors with Jill Dougherty. And as you might have surmised, Jill Dougherty is our host, and she is an adjunct professor at CERES and a former CNN bureau chief in Moscow, as well as having held many positions in journalism over the years, including as CNN's White House correspondent, and is also much in demand these days as events move with startling rapidity in our region of study. So I'm very much looking forward to this event. And Jill, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I want to congratulate you on your new book. Michael is a renowned scholar, an expert in the Soviet period, and his new book is out, just reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, very positively. So
Oh,
congratulations.
thanks for that, Jill. I appreciate it.
Great news. And, I have to put down my cup of coffee here, the Georgetown Journal cup of coffee, because I am over caffeinated trying to keep up with everything that is happening in the world. And really very grateful for our guest, whom I'll introduce in a couple of minutes. I just want to set up our discussion for today. So much is happening. And we actually even discuss behind the scenes, how do you even grab this tiger by the tail? And so we have something that is actually very current. In fact, today, there is an incident that we will get into, which is precisely what we are talking about during this hour. So let me just kind of begin with this idea. Obviously, it's the general theme is Russia and its neighbors, but this semester our focus is on what we're calling Russia's secret war against the West. And next Monday, as we know, is the third anniversary of Russia's 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And of course, right now we're seeing efforts to bring this to some type of conclusion or maybe just even reach a ceasefire. We're not going to talk about that specifically, but we are going to talk about another war that is ongoing, and that is a secret war that's sometimes hard to understand, hard to pin down, and sometimes even hard to blame on anyone, but it's definitely happening. The battle lines run through severed data cables, burnt out warehouses, jammed GPS systems, election interference, and even buoys marking international borders in the water being moved. So there's a lot to explore. And our guest is Jonatan Vseviov. He is the Secretary General of Estonia's Directorate of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the top position. And if that sounds like a big title, it is. But also, Secretary General Vseviov is not only one of Estonia's top diplomats, but he did serve as Estonia's ambassador to the United States. Before that, he was Secretary General of the Estonian Ministry of Defense. And very interestingly, he shared Estonia's defense policy domestically and internationally in creating that. He was one of the main drafters of the National Defense Development Plan, which was 2013 to 2022. And he's also been involved in development of the current deterrence and defense posture of NATO. He's also reserve officer in Estonia's military, graduate of the Department of Political Science at the University of Tartu, and ta-da, has a master's degree with honors in security studies from Georgetown University. So, long introduction, but welcome, Secretary General Vseviov.
Thank you very much, Jill. It's a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually. I'd much rather be there physically. And spend the next, what do we have, an hour with you discussing hybrids, Baltic Sea security, or the war in Ukraine, whatever is of interest to you. Just as a caveat, The things that I say that you like, please consider them to be Estonian government policy. The things you dislike were my personal opinions and observations.
Okay, well, duly noted. So what we're going to do is we have it roughly an hour. Secretary General Vseviov and I are going to talk for about 25, 30 minutes. I hope that Michael will be joining that as well. And then we're going to open to audience questions, and you can put those as usual in the Q&A function. So, maybe backing up here, because not everybody is really aware that this is going on. So we called it a secret war. Maybe you would call it something else, sir, but, it sounds ominous. Could you define exactly what that is? Could you give a few examples? We have one literally today in Sweden. And then we want to talk about the purpose of that hybrid war.
So thank you. That's the right place to start the discussion, because usually people describe this as hybrid warfare, hybrid attacks. It somewhat misses the point. What we're seeing happening all around Europe is a deliberate action on behalf of the Russian Federation, which is part of a coherent strategy. With the aim of sowing division and paralyzing our societies with fear. It's part of an overall strategy meant to disrupt Western policies, predominantly first and foremost at this stage, with regard to our support for Ukraine and pushback against Russian aggression. But the bigger strategic aims have been well articulated by the Russians themselves, including by President Putin. They are to do with the attempt to reshape European security architecture by pushing the Americans out of the continent, limiting American power globally, diminishing the role of NATO and the European Union as security providing mechanisms, and carving out a buffer zone on Russia's western borders that would consist of us, alongside other so-called new member states of NATO, although we've been in NATO for now, 21 years. The new member states, what the Russians themselves have described as their attempt to push NATO military activities back to pre-1997 borders. So each and every one of the incidents or the attacks might be confusing. It might be difficult for us to put our finger on what exactly happened, who did it, what the particular aim or what the aim of that particular activity was. But the overall pattern is clear and has been escalating since 2022. The most recent news that you referred to, the news that came out today on Sweden investigating another potential incident regarding undersea infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. We're not sure what that is yet, whether this is an incident that resulted in a previous incident with the same cable, whether this is a technical malfunction, or indeed something new. We, as Estonia, are investigating jointly with Finland an incident against one of our pipelines that connects us to Finland, as well as one of our cables, electricity cables that connects us with Finland. The Finns have an additional investigation going on. Then there is a joint, I think, Finnish, Lithuanian, German investigation going on. So again, each of those incidents separately, we're obviously investigating. We'll get to the bottom of what happened. And once we know for sure, make no mistake about it, we'll be loud and clear on CNN, on every news channel in the world about who did what. As of now, we haven't completed any of these separate investigations with regard to undersea infrastructure. However, the pattern is clear. Nothing happened in the Baltic Sea before 2022. And now all of a sudden, hardly a month goes by without something happening to our undersea infrastructure. On top of this, we have incidents where we have proven in our courts of law Russian operatives engaging in covert action. The most famous case in Estonia from recent months was an incident where the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, hired off of social media individuals, low-level crooks in Estonia, to conduct attacks against the infrastructure, low-level symbolic attacks. One of the targets was the private car of our interior minister. So they broke the windows of his car. There were other vehicles that were vandalized, owned by prominent Ukrainian refugees, monuments that were vandalized. So all in all, we have more than 10 people now, not only in custody, we have more than 10 people convicted in our courts of law for having carried out those attacks on behalf of GRU, accepting money from the GRU. They are now serving prison sentences. So we have been able to provide proof beyond reasonable doubt in our courts of law of the whole chain. What I can say about this is that the unfortunate, the problematic aspect of Russia's hybrid activity or hybrid warfare, a secret war against the West, is that they have now found a way to at least attempt to undermine our societal cohesion and unity on the cheap. There's almost no cost attached to them. There's no reputational cost, and no additional reputational cost, I should say, because they're already waging a large-scale war of aggression in violation of every international legal commitment that they themselves voluntarily have adopted. So the additional reputational damage is not noteworthy. And even in situations where our special services, where we manage to block the attacks, they're not losing high value assets. They're losing low-level crooks that they hired off of social media. So obviously it is, and at the same time, so they do this on the cheap, and at the same time, they have been unable to achieve their goals. The main goals, so, paralyzing us with fear, disrupting our Ukraine-related war policies, at least in Europe, that hasn't happened. So I would suggest to you that the overall situation is such that almost invites escalation. The costs wouldn't go up for the Russians. And in addition to seeing our infrastructure targeted, our elections targeted, our cybersecurity targeted, my concern is that we may find ourselves in a situation where human lives will become will come in danger unless we find a way to deter these attacks, which as of now we haven't been able to.
Well, that was exactly going to be my next question. What are you doing about it? What can you do about it? I mean, there must be some thinking in the Estonian government, and I'm presuming other governments. Poland has had odd incidents like I think there was a shopping center that was set afire, some type of arson. There are a lot of things going on in many different countries, but do you have any ideas as to what you could do?
So yes, the shopping mall, I think, was in Lithuania, but it goes back years to when they used polonium in England to go after the Skripals, or the shooting, the murder in the middle of Berlin. So I think the most important thing for us to do is realize that these are not isolated incidents. And when playing the game of whack-a-mole, defensive action has a role. And we need to get better at information exchange, intelligence information exchange, and other defensive measures. But at the end of the day, in a whack-a-mole situation, we need to realize that these are not just separate moles that are popping up. There's a player that's playing this game against us. His name is Putin, and he's sitting in the Kremlin. And in order to affect, or in order to have him stop, we need to affect his cost-benefit analysis. Like with cybersecurity, it's not the computer that's attacking you. There's a human being made of flesh and bone who's pushing the button on the other side. These attacks in Europe are not ordered. I mean, the separate attacks may be ordered by major generals in the GRU. The overall strategy is approved by Putin himself. So it is him that we need to affect. His cost-benefit analysis we need to affect. So I think the first thing to do is demonstrate to him that his attempts are futile. His main goal, immediate goal at the moment, is to derail our Ukraine policy. So that's what we need to do. We need to demonstrate that instead of slowing our military assistance to Ukraine, instead of slowing our pace on sanctions, for instance, his hybrid attacks on Europe result in the opposite. We'll provide more military assistance to Ukraine. We'll add on sanctions. So that's probably step number one. And step number two, we need to find a way, go after him. I'm not advocating for setting fire on Russian shopping malls or law-abiding countries. That's not what we do. But we need to make sure that every time he acts, we publicly, once we're ready, we publicly attribute, and if possible, go through our courts of law and convict his henchmen. So I think in combination, those two and the defensive measures could play a role in dissuading him from these attacks. But final point on this, the hybrid activity, the covert action in Europe currently is the sideshow. The main theater is the war in Ukraine. So you want to win a game of whack-a-mole, you need to punch out the guy who's playing against you. And the way we punch him out is push back successfully against his aggression in Ukraine, ensure that we reach a point where just and lasting peace becomes possible. We're not there yet, but that's what we're working for.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, I guess we might as well jump right into this. And Michael, you're welcome to jump in as well. But, you know, right now, it looks as if it's the reverse. I mean, you have the Trump administration making it very clear that they're putting the onus for this war on Ukraine, not on Russia. And Putin looks as if he is, sitting there with things going his way. I mean, I guess we don't have a lot of time in this hour to have a big, long discussion about that. But what is the feeling in Estonia right now in terms of where these discussions about bringing the war against Ukraine to a conclusion or a ceasefire, where is this going, and what is the feeling in Estonia about the process that we're in right now?
So since the beginning, we've described this war as being existential for us. Now, we're Northerners. We don't use words lightly. When we've consistently said that this is existential, I do hope people realize that that's exactly what we mean. It's existential because of two reasons. First, once this war is over, we'll have peace. And the way that the sort of peace we'll have will depend on the way this war ends. De facto norms of international life will be shaped by this outcome. We will either have a world where changing borders with military force becomes the norm or not. And if so, then which border remains secure? Now, we have a border with the Russians, and we don't want to go to a world where changing those borders becomes the norm, or where sovereignty for some countries is limited by the fact that their bigger neighbor objects to certain choices that they might want to make. The more direct reason why this war has existential consequences for us is related to Putin's goals, which haven't changed since 2021. I mean, since before 2021, he's pursued a coherent strategy. Ukraine is central to it, but it's not only about Ukraine. He wants all of Ukraine, by the way. He's not only after the few provinces in the east. Maybe de jure independent, but de facto controlled by Moscow. I don't have time to go through why that is, but all you need to do is read, Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard. He explains it, and he's not Ukrainian nor Russian, and yet gets it. But it's not only about Ukraine, it's also about the European security architecture and this buffer zone that he wishes to carve out on his western borders with countries where sovereignty would be limited. Now, we're not going to entertain that outcome. So what we've said from the beginning is we'll get to a satisfactory outcome once we establish a position of strength. Putin is not going to persuade it by our pleas for peace. He will only be persuaded to seriously consider changing those goals once he realizes that success becomes unlikely. So that's why we've had a dual strategy of, on the one hand, raising the cost of aggression through sanctions and other measures, and on the other hand, helping Ukraine with material assistance, military assistance, but also with the resource of hope. The only metric that matters is whether or not we've been able to convince Putin that time is no longer on his side. Now, long-term wise, time has never been on his side. He realizes that. Long-term wise, Russia has no chance. But in the immediate future, he's always expected the West to crumble politically. So that's the metric that matters. We haven't obviously achieved that position of strength yet. Although at the same time, I should say that Russia isn't 10 feet tall. They're hurting. Whatever pain we think we're feeling the economic, for economic reasons or political reasons. I mean, this pales in comparison to the pain that the Russians are feeling. They're still losing more than 1,000 soldiers a day. Their economy, their demographics, everything is down the toilet. So they're hurting. But on this one argument that the West is about to change course, Putin's theory of victory stands. So where are we now? I mean, things aren't obviously great with regard to the overall sort of the declaratory part of the picture. There are question marks that have been raised with regard to the West's staying power. All I can say to that is that we're going to be focusing on what we can do. What we can do as Estonia, and what we can do as Europe. And the messages coming out of European capitals are and should be to the Ukrainians reassuring. We're going to step up. And if indeed the Americans decide that you can no longer contribute as much as you've contributed in the past, which would be a shame, we would obviously try to convince you to change your mind. But if that's not going to happen, then we're going to fill the gaps. And we will be supplying Ukraine with hope, and we will be supplying Ukraine with weapons, and we will be increasing the pressure on the Russians through sanctions, and we will confiscate Russian frozen assets to pay for it all. And I think you will be seeing steps from Europe to that goal coming in the next few days, and then continuing for the weeks and months to come. It's not going to be easy without the United States, because transatlantic security depends on Europe and the United States working together. But if indeed the United States has to pull back, has to limit its contributions, then we have no choice. We're going to have to step up and fill the gaps. Final thing on this: there is not going to be peace, lasting peace, or just peace without the Ukrainians and without the Europeans. Nothing about Ukraine without the Ukrainians, and nothing about Europe without the Europeans. This does not mean that we're begging for a seat at a negotiations process that we think is flawed. No. It means that European decisions will be taken by Europeans. And hopefully we'll be able to prove in the coming days and weeks that we're not just only about that we're not just talking, but also undertaking action. I would ask you to give us a few days. Things are happening fast. Give us a few days, and hopefully we'll be able to prove that to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Michael David Fox, do you have something that you wanted to chime in?
You raised many, yes, because you raised many big questions. But before we tackle the big ones about Ukraine, the new stance of the United States and all its, complications, I want to return just to the hybrid warfare for a minute, because on the one hand, I mean, in terms of this whole concept of hybrid war, it's been called non-linear, non-conventional. One of the reasons that it exists is because there's not a parity, right? Militarily, that these are in some sense weapons of a weak power that has to resort to some of these measures. But specifically, my question is, and a lot of these things, disinformation and assassination went back to the Soviet era, but the sabotage, I'm not so sure, has such deep roots. And can we maybe discuss how it seems like some of the reports show that Russia is not being especially careful in concealing its role in the sabotage. In that sense, it wants to send a message, right, that it is behind these attacks. And so, one could actually talk about like terrorism and terror because that also wants to send a message, right? If you look at that concept historically. But my question then is about, also the role of Chinese ships that, have been implicated in some of these. So it seems to be a role for China in this whole picture. And the final aspect, which is another specific question, is that when we talk about these non-conventional means, using Russian diasporas abroad has often been a part of Russia's toolkit. And, I remember being in Narva and other parts of Estonia where there's significant Russian population. I wonder if you could speak about that role, the place of the Russian, ethnic Russian population in Estonia.
So starting from the last question, most of the recruitment, to the best of our understanding, is indeed done in Russian language on social media platforms that predominantly use Russian language, like Telegram channels and so on and so forth. This is not to say that that you're a potential terrorist when you speak Russian at home. It's obviously not. That's obviously not the statement that I'm trying to make here. But they do tend to recruit people off social media platforms that use Russian language predominantly. These days, they don't need thousands of people. The attacks that have been carried out, I mean, they're not sophisticated in terms of the tradecraft, if you will. And even in Estonia's case, I mean, the people we have sitting in jail now, I mean, 10, 15 people out of a country of 1.4 million. We're a small country, but still, I mean, 10, 15 people, the percentage is tiny. So the question of whether your city, your town, your county has 40% or 60% or 80% of your population that speaks Russian at home is really not that significant. They can find the 10 people and then have them, if necessary, move from one European country to another to conduct the attack. In Europe, I mean, we have open borders, and that's fairly easy for them to do. Recruit the individuals in one EU member state, carry out the attacks in another. One element of the deterrence against these activities is the rate of success we have in apprehending the individuals, in actually spoiling the attacks. It's one thing to carry out hooliganism or vandalism if your baseline assumption is that you're unlikely to get caught. If, however, you're likely to get caught, the price goes up, and thus the whole operation becomes riskier, which is why we put such an emphasis on public attribution and legal proceedings. We want to make sure that every time something happens, every time we catch the perpetrators, it's widely understood around the world that we've caught them. Now, on whether or not the Russians are trying to hide their tracks, I mean, the use of polonium in England doesn't really suggest that they are trying to hide their tracks. Operationally, they are trying to hide tracks. I mean, they have taken good care of not, so they're not trying to get caught, is what I'm trying to say. When they get caught, but they're not trying to get caught. So from that perspective, they are hiding their tracks. Once the attack takes place, I think they're perfectly happy if people make the connection to Russia, because that sends the message that they're trying to send, that Russia is all powerful, they're able to do things. On the fact that some of the vessels that we suspect of having played a role in the undersea infrastructure incidents are Chinese, All I can say is that the investigations are ongoing. We will leave no stone unturned to find out exactly what happened. And I'll use this opportunity to reiterate that we expect the Chinese authorities to cooperate with us on this investigation.
Michael, do you want to follow up, or could I jump in here? Yeah. By the way, a reminder, Q&A function for any questions, because I do want to get the audience involved, and I'm sure there are people who do have questions, so please put them in Q&A. Secretary General, are you aware of any similar attacks in the United States? I know there have been reports about electric grid, water, et cetera, but are you aware in connection with this of anything in the US?
Nothing beyond what has been reported in the press over the years, nothing beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Russians, I read an article just recently, say that some of their cables were cut. Now, I mean, this could be a useless process of whack-a-mole here, or who's responsible. But do you feel that there's any type of pushback in terms of carrying out sabotage against Russia at this point?
Could you repeat the question? Pushback against?
Yeah, the Russians are saying that some of their cables were cut. I don't have all the details, but do you have any evidence that there is any type of organized plan to undermine what's going on to undermine Russia in this way?
No.
Mm-hmm.
And my condolences to our Russian partners for having their cables broken. I wonder who did it.
I have a question that it might be interesting to kind of dig into why and how these things happen. I'm thinking, for instance, and I can't remember exactly the date, but there was maybe a year or two ago where apparently there were buoys between Narva and Russia, the easternmost part of Estonia, and then across the river, which Michael has been there, I've been there. It's an amazing place to go to. Across the river is Russia. And there were buoys that marked the international border that were literally moved. Now, when I read that, I thought, there's a ridiculous side to this. I mean, it seemed kind of insane to try to move buoys. What would be the purpose? Why would they spend time and money trying to do that?
Well, we don't know. It must be that the sanctions are working and they're in dire need of scrap metal or something. They indeed came in the shadow of the night last year and stole 25, I think was the number, 25 of the light buoys that we had put in the water to help with navigation. And we obviously placed them in Estonian waters. Now, it's important for people to realize when we're talking about the Narva River, which is the border river, we're not talking about the Amazon or the Nile. It's not, miles wide. It doesn't even come close to the Potomac. It's a fairly narrow river. So I'm not talking about miles here. I'm talking about meters. We obviously, we pay close attention to what's happening on the border. So we had, we were observing them while they were stealing the buoys. And since that moment, we've taken a conscious decision on trying to handle this incident as professionally and in a measured manner as possible. At the same time, obviously underlining that we will not be making any concessions on our territorial integrity. An inch is an inch, a meter is a meter, it's Estonian territory, it's EU territory, it's NATO territory, and we're not going to play games with territorial integrity for obvious reasons. So since May of last year, the Russians have been dodging our proposals for a measured and professional solution that we think might help them as well as us in solving this what appears to be a territorial dispute, because the Russians alleged that the buoys in question were in Russian waters. We'll see where it goes. Currently, in the winter, there are no buoys. The buoys are there for the navigation period. We're fairly far up north, so the river tends to the ice freeze, and we'll see what happens once spring arrives. What we're trying to do is obviously make sure that every step of the way, every step that we take, we keep our allies and partners informed, so that everybody understood that when playing games with Estonia, you're not just playing games with Estonia, you're playing games with the 32 allies of NATO and the 27 member states of the European Union. And when you go back and look at the history of this incident, you can see in the public domain, everyone, leaders from all around Europe, voice their strong support for Estonia in this endeavor, and that I am certain will continue to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is a question from Meva. Oh, did you have something, Michael? Or
Well, I can wait till after the other question. I do have one
okay.
more, but we can wait.
Well, let's jump in. We'll take this from Meva Bergmans. What are your thoughts regarding the fact that President Macron always focuses on the bigger powers instead of including all those supporting Ukraine, regardless of their size within the EU? Thanks for your insights. Now, I don't know whether you want to explain why, if that's true, but what are your thoughts, sir?
Funny, because 10 minutes ago, no, 38 minutes ago, our foreign minister concluded a phone call with the French foreign minister. I think sometime next week, the French defense minister will be here in Tallinn. They will be, in addition to bilateral discussions, they will be doing things that are going to include other allies. They will be doing international things. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to say what exactly, but you will find out next week. Mm-hmm. When President Macron gathered key European leaders at a meeting last week, then the gathering on Friday, I get my dates mixed up, fairly recently included our Prime Minister. And the day before, in the smaller circle discussions, we've had the Nordic Baltic group represented by our rotating presidency, which currently happens to be Denmark. So we don't feel left out at all in European matters. We don't feel left out at all. And furthermore, we believe that Europe tends to echo our talking points, not because bigger countries take their cues from us, but likely because they reach the same conclusions that we do. We're not the only ones describing this war as being existential. The French president has done the same. Existential for Europe, existential for the European Union, and frankly, existential for their countries. The French president has done the same. The president of the European Commission has on numerous occasions done the same, and so on and so forth. So in Europe, we feel perfectly at ease with the level of access that we have and with the level of influence that we have on their thinking and their policies. Doesn't mean that we always agree, but access-wise, we're okay.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
So my question actually follows up on this one about small powers, because over the last several years, I sometimes read reports that although we in the United States tend to lump the Baltics together, the three Baltic countries have not always been as coordinated as they might be in terms of their strategic planning and strategic cultures. And I wonder if recent events have, changed that and there's more coordination. And the other thing that one has read over the last few years is about preparations for counterinsurgency in case, because, there is a nuclear shield, but this connects to the broader concerns about the US now undermining NATO and, the defense of Ukraine with the rather wild statements coming out of the Trump administration. But if you can't rely on a nuclear shield, and if, for example, Russia in its first day of war against Ukraine 3 years ago took far more territory than the entire Baltics, you have to rely on counterinsurgency. And I wonder if you could talk about this, if there's anything you can say publicly.
Thank you. First, on the coordination, I think we're fairly well coordinated. We are separate countries, obviously, and I mean we're separate. We're as separate as they can be. I mean, culturally and historically, the only thing that really unites us is geography and recent history, but only recent history. If you go and look at the Baltic states in depth, you will obviously realize that the Lithuanians have a fundamentally different background historically than for instance, we do here in Estonia. Language-wise, we're related to the Finns, the Latvians, and the Lithuanians to each other. Culturally, I could go down the list. So we're separate countries. And when handled as one entity, the Baltic states, I mean, it sometimes feels like what I assume would feel to a Belgian to be always looked in together with the Dutch and the Luxembourgians. They too coordinate very closely, but they are different countries and they don't necessarily always agree and always have the exact same talking points. This said, especially in the recent months and years, what we've seen is really a tightening of regional cooperation around the Baltic Sea in the Nordic-Baltic 8 grouping, from Iceland all the way to Lithuania, including the Danes, the Norwegians, the Swedes, and the Finns. This war has probably been the catalyst for this regionalization or regional integration, but more directly Finnish and Swedish membership in NATO. Now, membership in NATO of Sweden and Finland in of itself didn't bring a single additional friendly ship, or a single additional friendly aircraft to our region. We've always considered the Finns and the Swedes to be friends and allies. What NATO membership for Finland and Sweden has done, though, is provide us with an umbrella under which we can pursue ever closer de facto regional defense cooperation. So that our chief of defense would know what the Finnish brigades would be doing on day 10 of any conflict and vice versa, to put it very simply. So on a daily basis, almost on a daily basis now, our foreign ministers interact with each other, our prime ministers interact with each other. If you Google our statements, then as often as you would find Estonian foreign policy related statements, you would be finding Nordic-Baltic foreign policy statements. In the very near future, you will be reading a Nordic-Baltic foreign ministers joint article in the international press. And also in the very near future, you will be reading another Nordic-Baltic prime minister's statement on the situation in Ukraine. And this is now happening almost on a weekly basis. So not just the Baltic states, Nordic-Baltic. On the credibility of NATO deterrence in the Baltic states, or in Estonia in particular, that's something that we've worked on since joining NATO, since 2004. NATO membership in of itself, I mean, it is a powerful political deterrent. It's a very powerful promise with a certain level of constructive ambiguity around the Article 5 wording, of course. But in of itself, it's hollow. Throughout the Cold War, it wasn't just the Article 5 promise that kept Western Europe safe. It was also the posture of Allied forces. So since 2004, we worked on really, filling this Article 5 statement in the Baltic states, and we're happy with where we are today. And NATO deterrence posture is manifested predominantly by Allied boots on the ground in the Baltic states. There's an air policing component with Allied fighter jets operating out of our air bases, but there is also a forward-based land forces component in each of the so-called frontline states, from Estonia all the way down to Bulgaria, etc., etc. In Estonia's case, we have the Brits and the French as the leading contributors. As you are well aware, both obviously nuclear powers. In case of Latvia, the leading country, the framework nation, is Canada, reinforcing the transatlantic link. In Lithuania's case, the lead nation is Germany, without whom any big logistic operation in Europe is impossible. In Poland, the framework nation is the United States, another nuclear ally. But in the case of the Baltic states, the bulk of the weight is carried by Europeans and includes European nuclear powers. This is not a chance or a result of an accident. This was deliberately built, deliberately constructed in order not to convince us of the credibility of Article 5, but in order to convince Putin of the credibility of Article 5. We're confident that what we have in place today is sufficient, although it's never perfect, it's never ready. So we continue to increase our investment in this posture, including our investment in our own forces, which continue to be the biggest military force inside Estonia, obviously. Our defense spending now is, on a per capita basis, higher than that of the United States, and it is going up. So I think it's likely that we will be looking at above 4% defense spending next year. We're currently at around 3.5% of our defense spending. So I'm fairly confident with what we have in terms of both the nuclear dimension as well as the conventional dimension, and especially after Finland and Sweden joined the alliance, I'm fairly confident that we have the situation under control in precisely the way that the Americans have always wanted us Europeans to have things under control, with the Europeans carrying the overwhelming portion of the weight.
That leads into exactly what I wanted to ask. So there are two questions concerning NATO. President Trump, back in 2016, his first term in office, reportedly wanted to pull the United States out of NATO. Reportedly, some of his senior officials convinced him that was not a good idea. Many say right now that it's back on the table, that President Trump could revert to that idea that the United States should pull out of NATO. So that's question number one. How concerned are Europeans about having that happen? And then the other thing is this debate about how much each country should contribute to their own defense as part of NATO. And I know, as you said, Estonia is one of the, if not the top, is up there. But the debate for some of these other countries is that if they have to provide more money for their defense, that it will create domestic problems and people concerned that, we can't afford it, kind of like the debate in the United States. So is that a factor in Estonia specifically? Are people balking at giving more money to their own defense, which would be part of NATO?
Well, quite the opposite. If there's any criticism in the Estonian government, or in the Estonian parliament, I should say, or in the Estonian public towards the government on defense-related issues, then it's that the government is moving too slowly and not resolutely enough. Our opinion polls reflect the same. There's overwhelming support for defense spending, although there are obviously debates between different political forces on where the money should come from. So that obviously there is no consensus in the society on that. But we have been increasing defense spending over the past few years quite significantly, and under different various governments. So various political forces that have been in power in Estonia have had a almost near consensus view on the need for more defense spending. Furthermore, I should say that Estonian political dynamic is not that different from the United States in terms of the heated nature of the political debate. Let's put it this way: opposition and coalition don't agree on almost anything. Yet, when Ukraine-related resolutions were presented in the parliament, they passed with unanimity. And this is as possible in our political system as anything passing in the United States Congress unanimously. So from people from the far left to the far right, everyone in favor. So this, I hope, is a good enough demonstration on the seriousness with which we take serious security, and the fact that our immediate neighbor, has embarked upon a war of aggression, large-scale war of aggression, with the aim of reshaping European security. And I think going from European capital to European capital, I get the same sentiment. Perhaps the level of acuteness is different depending on your geographic location, and that's only natural. But the understanding seems to be there. I think when you look at European track record, defense spending has been increasing. I mean, most of the increases in NATO countries' defense spending has come from Europe in the past few years. Are we satisfied? No, we're not. We're going to be pushing for an even higher benchmark for NATO defense spending come the Hague summit this coming summer. Now, I don't want to be offering running commentary on what the American president said or did. That's not my job. There are plenty of pundits in the United States perfectly capable of analyzing what's happening in your politics. What I can say, though, is what the Estonian view on transatlantic relations is. And I trust that this is not just the Estonian view, but a widely held European view. We value the transatlantic relationship because not only because of the shared values and democratic principles. Let's leave those aside for a second. We value the transatlantic relationship because looking at the challenges that confront us in the 21st century, the global challenges, we recognize that even us Europeans, even in a situation where we have a united Europe with 440 million people, we're not powerful enough, to be honest with you, to handle those challenges alone. So what we need to work with our closest allies, our closest partners, amongst whom our transatlantic partners, the United States and Canada, are obviously most prominent. We need to work together, not only because of our shared history or shared ideals, but because of necessity. Now, the United States will make up the United States mind, obviously. But that's our position. We think it's necessary for both of us. Alliances are like marriages. They only work for as long as both sides want to stay in the marriage and work to make the marriage work. There is readiness, I believe, in Europe to work to make this marriage work. We've heard American concerns about European low-level defense spending. I think we've proven that we're able to take action. But these things are always two-way roads. It goes both ways. We're all democracies. Public opinion matters. And we shouldn't take anything in a marriage for granted.
Mm-hmm. We only have 5 minutes left, roughly. And Michael and I were talking yesterday evening about a question that's a little bit different, but I'd be interested in your opinion. It has to do, and maybe, Michael, you could formulate it better. But you, Secretary General Vseviov, with your experience, both at Georgetown and then as a diplomat, and then also with the Defense Ministry, you have a really rich background in all of this top-level experience. What have you learned as a diplomat and as someone in the Defense Ministry that might be a lesson for how international relations, security studies, as you studied at Georgetown, how should they be taught? Did I present that okay, Michael? All right. What do you think?
How international relations should be taught?
Yeah, I mean, your experience, if you were to advise your professors at Georgetown, is there something that you've learned that is a different way of looking at security studies?
I think I know I've benefited greatly from the education that I received at Georgetown. Not only because of the outstanding quality of the faculty, the professors who had first-hand experience in foreign policy, in military matters, in intelligence, obviously on top of their academic brilliance, but also because of the other students that I had a chance to interact with, the outstanding individuals from all around the United States and from all around the world that I was lucky enough to sit together with at seminars discussing things as, different as counterterrorism to European security. History is another good teacher. I wonder whether we, as societies, are doing enough to remember our own lessons, from our own history. I mean, simply thinking back to the symbolism of the past few days, where European leaders gather under the banner of Weimar Plus, while there is a Munich conference taking place in Munich that discusses whether or not we should attempt to feed the aggressor with the freedom of others in hopes of buying ourselves stability. I mean, the irony of it all. So yes, I think this is not criticism, obviously, towards Georgetown, but a question really, whether or not we Europeans here in Europe remember our own almost immediate or recent history well enough to avoid the mistakes that seem so obvious once you take a second and really think about it all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a historian, I can only agree with you because I think it's also partly the ethos of the historical profession that we don't want to be presentist and, we want to understand the past on its own terms. But if no one's going to interpret the lessons of the past professionally, it should be a greater role for historians. So I think one thing about the School of Foreign Service is it allows historians like me to be part of the faculty, which is not true of every School of Public and International Affairs.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess on that note, and it's really something to think deeply about, I want to thank you very much, Secretary General of Estonia's Foreign Ministry, Jonatan Vseviov, and thank you to Georgetown University's Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies. Thank you, Michael David Fox, our leader. And as always, we want to thank the Carnegie Corporation of New York for all of its generous support of our programming. Thank you. I'm Jill Dougherty, and I hope you'll come back for the next discussion.
Thank you.